Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Conversion and Underutilized Commercial Space. My name's Claire. I am the Deputy Registrar at the OAA. We will begin our webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from today. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we begin our webinar today, I do want to share some important information just to have an effective experience. Note that we are recording our session for quality and educational purposes, and to maintain a stable internet connection, we've muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. However, we really encourage you to participate through the Q&A window, so you'll note at any point in the presentation, you can submit one of your questions through that function, and we will reserve those questions for the designated Q&A period at the end of the webinar. And just note that our chat function is also deactivated. For those of you who are seeking Con Ed hours, we do require you to attend 80% of the session today in order to be accredited those hours into your transcript, and just allow for a few weeks of processing time. We provide closed captioning services in multiple languages. And finally, we want to remind you that our presenter does not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. And I just wanted to let everybody know that our regularly scheduled or our scheduled presenter, Principal Denis Paletti, was unfortunately unable to join us. However, we are very grateful and happy to have with us today Senior Associate and Project Manager at Core Architects, Daniel Lee. So everybody, please welcome Daniel Lee.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Claire. Welcome, and thanks for joining me today. So as Claire mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about conversion of underutilized commercial office space to a residential use. And kind of I'm going to focus more specifically later on one project. But I suppose I don't need to convince anybody of this, I'm sure. There are several general benefits to the conversion of commercial space to residential. We'll just run over those kind of high-level points first. Should say cost efficiency is obviously one point. There's less build cost. Sustainability, lower carbon footprint, the reuse of the existing structure is a big factor. Faster project completion because a certain portion of the building is already complete. And urban revitalization as well. So breathing new life into some kind of fading commercial areas or mixed use areas of the city. So that's kind of a high level overview of some benefits. So the project that we've been working on at Core Architects is kind of marketed right now as E-Lofts, and it's at 250 Ferran Drive in Toronto. So E-Loft it's not only an adaptive reuse, but it's also going to be purpose-built or purpose-converted rental units. And it's a project that we're working on for Amexon Developments. We've worked with them over a number of years on several other kind of interesting adaptive type projects, 488 University being a big one. On that project, we took an existing office building, reclad that, and didn't adapt it to residential, but we actually added a tower on top of that office space. So it became an office podium with a residential tower above. Another interesting project with them is Central Park, which is up at Leslie and Shepherd in Toronto. It's a 12-acre master plan community. But the majority of that is new build, but some of that is also adaptive reuse, and it has some commercial space, a couple of commercial existing buildings that are being adapted, similar to this, into residential rental suites. So if we look at our project, 250 for Rand, at the context and the site, so 250 for Rand specifically, and sort of, I guess, generally for all projects, why is a building a good candidate for an adaptive reuse? So we'll look at some of the factors for our project that made 250 for Rand a good candidate from a contextual standpoint. So here's a context map. You can see our site in the center there in red. That's 250 Ferran Drive. So what are two things that us or the developer, obviously a long time before we became involved in the project, would think about in terms of identifying a good commercial candidate for this type of conversion? The first factor, I suppose, would be, is it currently functioning right now successfully as a commercial building? If it is, then maybe it's not a good candidate. In our case, it certainly wasn't. I believe that the tenancy for that building was below 50%, and therefore, a prime candidate for converting to some other use, as it was kind of severely underutilized. And then another factor is, what is the surrounding land use? So in this case, the majority of the neighboring sites are actually residential already. There's some low-rise to the northwest. The south and southwest has various sort of mid-rise condo and apartment buildings. And then obviously the DVP is directly to the east there. So from fitting into the community, it was a box ticked from that perspective. And then also we look at connectivity and livability. And this project is actually already in an MTSA. So you can see from that map, the public transit is very good. For this neighborhood, you've got the LRT shown there in that dashed blue line, which the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, that is, which we should be open or running any day now. And then there's obviously other transport there. You can see the Ontario line, the subway stations. There's two close by. There's a bus terminal. This neighborhood also has great connectivity in terms of bike lanes and stuff along Eglinton and all through those residential streets. So great in terms of connectivity and livability, because there's a lot of residential already in the area. It ticks boxes for that also. There's already kind of infrastructure such as schools and stuff in the neighborhood. There's cultural activities such as the Aga Khan. And I believe there used to also be a science center quite close by in this neighborhood. So here's an aerial view, a little bit closer in of the site itself and its lot. So the building that we are converting is that 15 or 14-story commercial tower. Now, the remainder of the site actually runs about 200 foot deep back to the boundary of the DVP. And the rest of the site contains a 6-story parking structure, and the rest is just a surface parking lot, both of which are obviously underutilized given the occupancy in the building, and also the huge surface parking lot that's right next door. So the plan for this project is to split it into 2 phases. So the conversion of 250 Ferran Drive itself is going to be phase 1, and that's what we're working on right now. And as part of that application, we are also going to be a rezoning application, like ZBA. We're going to be demolishing the 6-story parking structure, tearing up the surface parking, and sodding all of that phase 2 site in preparation for a future development, which at the moment is undefined. But given the dimensions of that site, it can certainly take one or possibly even two further residential buildings. So this is another aerial view. Our building 250 Farand is actually the one in the background. The building in the foreground there with the ICI Bank signage is 150 Farand. And so Amazon Developments actually own both of these towers. And as I mentioned earlier, 250 Farand was less than 50% tenanted. And that's also the case for 150 Farand. So it was a fairly straightforward solution to negotiate with the tenants and move those that wanted to continue renting a space from 250 Farand into 150 Farand. So the 150 Farand building currently is fairly close to 100% occupied now, and 250 Farand is kind of on its way to being completely empty and kind of ready for our conversion. So we've consolidated the tenants basically. So a little bit of a closer look at the building itself, the existing office building. So it has a precast facade with these kind of narrow ribbon windows. It's a fairly old building. And you can see from some of those interior shots that those ribbon windows, the format of that, it's not allowing a huge amount of light into those spaces. Most of the office floors have various, tenant-specific layouts with office partitions and things like that within the space. Some of the ground floor is utilized or was utilized with a gymnasium and some other commercial spaces like a cafe and stuff. So we'll just take a look at the client brief just to see what they're aiming to achieve in this project. So some of the design objectives. So they want to retrofit, obviously, the building with some loft-style rental units. It's going to be purpose-built rental, as I said, or purpose-converted. There's going to be some commercial and some amenity space at the grade-related floors. There's actually two grade-related floors because there's the ground floor space, but there's also a lower concourse, which there's kind of some wells that dip down. The landscape dips down to allow some glazing at the lower floor, so it's kind of a semi-basement. There's also going to be some rooftop amenity, and there's a planned lap pool and stuff going onto the roof. We're going to remove that precast facade with the ribbon windows and replace it with a new window wall system. And there's going to be operables and Juliet balconies, but no actual balconies on the facade. We're aiming to meet the TDS standards for the City of Toronto, and we're also looking at the standards for CMHC financing because this is going to be a rental building. So those are some of the factors that we're considering with the design of this. I should mention that we're currently at ZBA right now in this project officially, but I'll talk a little bit further on about the timeline for this project and how the schedule can work out. And just to mention about the CMHC finance, actually how it kind of ties into some of the things we're looking at. So some of the requirements for CMHC, I guess it's similar to like a lead system in the sense that it's kind of a points-based system that can be weighted to various different categories, and you can obviously apply more weighting to some than others depending on your particular building. Some of those categories are affordability of the units, energy efficiency, accessibility standards, CSA standards that they're looking for. So you can kind of use those, weight to whatever you want, or what kind of suits the dimensions or the building that you have specifically. But here's just a quick overview of the statistics for the project that we have right now. So we're at about 260,000 square feet within that building of residential. There's also a little bit of commercial space proposed on the ground floor. We have a total of 331 units, and the mix is about 40% of one bed and 60% of larger units. And you'll kind of see later on in the presentation that that's it's kind of a result of the dimensions of the building itself. It's quite a deep floor plate. And so in terms of parking, the existing office building doesn't have any below grade parking. And we didn't want to, provide a huge parking lot to meet the, certain zoning requirements or bylaw requirements. So we're just proposing 29 surface parking spots that are going to be in that kind of phase 1 portion of the site. Once phase 2 is developed, or if phase 2 is developed, it's likely that there will be below grade parking built as part of that new build development. And at that point, they can obviously see whether, some of that below grade parking needs to be built and applied to this rental building. But with it being in an MTSA, obviously it's a reasonable assumption to say that, people can live in this building and not require a car. And in that same regard, we are obviously providing, a number of bicycle spots to meet the Toronto Green standards and the Toronto zoning bylaws. So that's just a brief overview of the current statistics. So now we'll look at some of the challenges for this project. And as I mentioned, we're still technically in the ZBA phase of this job. So any of the challenges that we're going to discuss, I'm sure they're not going to be all of the challenges. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that come up over the next year or so on this project. And so we'll just jump into some of those. So this image shows one of the current floor plans. This is one of the typical office floors. You can see the partitions and stuff there. As you can see that the floor plate is like 1,600 square meters, which for a residential tower, well, a residential tower is pretty large. At least in if you compare to like the City of Toronto's tall building guidelines, it's basically 2 of those kind of guideline towers stuck together. And also you might notice that some of those depths are quite big in terms of sort of if you were starting with a new build residential project, you wouldn't typically start with a 17.5 meter dimension from exterior face to the core of the building. You see the core there, there's existing elevators, there's a scissor stair, there's various other services and washrooms in the center. And then there's an open plan structural grid, column grid. And so that column grid is obviously a good opportunity because there isn't shear walls or anything like that, or other structural walls to deal with. It's a nice open and adaptable space. But obviously some of those deep dimensions are going to be a bit of a challenge. Another challenge, this is probably more of an opportunity than a challenge. The floor to ceiling heights. So the floor to ceiling heights in this building are fairly generous when compared to sort of typical new build residential floor to ceiling. Obviously a residential, you build like a 3 meter floor to floor or 2.95. With this building, we basically have 12 foot, like 3.7 meter for a typical floor. And then you can see some other conditions there for some of the non-typical floors. We've got 6.1 meter ground floor space and a 6.7 meter kind of double height space at the top of the building. So with the ground floor, I'll show you later on, we're thinking about adding some kind of split level mezzanine type spaces into some of the ground floor units. And for that upper space, that double height space at 6.7, we're actually thinking about adding an additional floor there. So this building will go from being 14-story to 15-story. And I should say, so those 12-foot high floor to floors are also going to kind of help us counteract some of those deep units that that we probably will end up with based on that 17-meter dimension to the exterior face. So another challenge, although not necessarily a challenge, but I kind of put it into this section, is the project schedule and the project management style for this project. So these diagrams, they're called iron triangles, I believe. So what you see on the left there is like a sequential project, something that you're probably more familiar with. And it basically means that the scope is kind of fixed and defined early on, and it kind of filters down into the cost and the time of the job, which is more estimated. This project is definitely on the other side there. It's more adaptable, and the workflow is more agile. We have a very fixed timeline already for the project, same for the cost, and we're basically working kind of very flexibly in terms of defining the scope in some cases as we go along, and as work kind of proceeds. And you know, I suppose that might get one or two parts beaten faster, dealing with things like that. But obviously, if this is understood at the start of the project or before the start of the project, when we're talking about fee proposals and contracts, as long as this is understood and factored in, then it can be just as good a way of working. So now we'll just move on to some of the solutions. Or current solutions, should I say, based on the phase we're in right now with the project. So we'll just take a look at the building services first. So we have obviously a lot of floor depth. And we also have a bunch of existing services that would be a good idea to maintain on locations. So what we're trying to do, you can see on the plan there, that's a typical floors demising plan right now. And what we're trying to do is obviously use the depth of that floor plate and tuck as many of those services back into the center of the building as we can, shorten the units, and keep obviously as much as we can for the units on the exterior. So the yellow there, the electrical room, that's actually the existing electrical space for all of the office floors. So we're going to reuse that for the electrical for the residential. And the green, which is going to be the garbage chute, that is the location where the comms room for all of the office floors is right now. So obviously that room's not required anymore, and it's a great location to put your kind of internal services. Same for that VRF space. So there's going to be a VRF system for this building, a hybrid VRF, and it requires kind of access to a lot of piping and stuff like that. So we're tucking all those things into the center of the building, and then we're also using a lot of kind of centralized air intake and exhaust. So the units themselves, it's been decided there's only going to be one exhaust that goes through the facade of the building, and that's going to be the small kitchen exhaust, which will just be like an 8-inch penetration. So there'll only be one per unit, and everything else is going to be central and up through air handling unit on the roof. And having some of this additional floor depth, we realize actually ties in fairly nicely with some of the CMHC financing requirements, because a lot of the systems that are going to be more energy efficient quite often, such as the VRF, need a little bit more space in the central air and stuff. So these things need a little bit more space taken out of the floor plate, and sometimes they can eat away a bit too much of the floor plate when you're looking at a fairly small, tall and narrow tower. But in our case, for this building, some of that floor area is not exactly at a premium, with it being quite deep. And so it kind of dovetails quite nicely with, using some of that space and, some of the CMHC financing requirements. So this is just another plan that shows higher up. So that central area, you see that blue area is kind of grown, and that's because of some of the duct transfers. And it's also, when we get to level 14 and 15 of this building, that space is going to expand, and it's going to house some of the other mechanical equipment, such as boilers and things like that, which means we'll have less equipment and stuff at the roof, which we're going to use for outdoor amenity in the pool and an indoor amenity space also. So we're kind of using some of that additional floor depth that we have to kind of squeeze in as many of the services as we can in an efficient manner. This is the lower concourse level. You can see the colored boxes there, the yellow and the blue. So these are existing rooms. So obviously the existing building has a hydro transformer vault and an electrical room, existing pump room, and we plan on just maintaining that equipment as much as we can and reusing those spaces. Just a quick note about that hybrid VRF system. So the image there on the bottom obviously is an office layout, but essentially it can work the same for residential purposes. The good thing about the hybrid VRF is that the amount of kind of chemical coolant and refrigerant is only about 20%. It runs that green line there that runs from the unit to those kind of transfer boxes is the only refrigerant. And then the next 80% is actually just hot water and cold water. So what comes out and travels from that point, which would be in those VRF rooms to the suites themselves, is just going to be plumbing. It's just plumbing water lines basically, and with it being variable, basically it's controlled by the unit. So it's a very energy efficient system, and the hybrid version with the water is obviously a lot cleaner as well. None of the coolant or anything gets anywhere near any of the residential suites. So if you remember when we looked at the existing section of the building, we had those quite tall floor to floors, but we did have the precast and those ribbon windows. So you can see on that top image there, on the right hand side of that image is the existing condition, the ribbon window with the precast above and below. And then on the left there is a mock-up. So it's basically a printed version, physical print of that rendering on the bottom that's been kind of stuck over the wall as a mock-up. And what we're trying to show there is that, what we're trying to achieve is more light penetration. As we have quite a deep floor plate, we want to kind of get as much light as we can to the back of those suites. And I'll show you some of the suites later on. So if we just look at some of the typical floors first, I should say the suite layouts are actually not by Core Architects. 2x4 is the interior designer for this project, and they're working with Amex on the suite layouts themselves, and we're coordinating on the demising and stuff right now. What we have are some fairly longer and narrow suites with some buried bedrooms. And that's why we want that maximum light penetration to allow light into the back of those suites. You can see from one of these kind of earlier renderings there that we're kind of trying to celebrate the fact that it's a conversion rather than hide the fact. So these are sort of loft style units where you're going to see exposed ceilings and things like that. We're not trying to hide the fact that we're dealing with some existing conditions there. Just to touch on the unit sizes, so the one bed's around 465 average, but the 2 and the 3 beds are fairly large, 832 square feet for a 2 bed, nearly 1,000 for a 3 bed. So we'll take a look at one or two of those suites. So that there, the 16-meter length there on the left-hand side of the page, that's a 2 bed, 2 bath, and this is how we've kind of tried to resolve the additional depth. Obviously, if you were going to take a 2 bed unit and put all the bedrooms up on the glazing, that 5-meter width is obviously going to be 11 or 12 meters, and the 12-meter wide at 16-meter depth is obviously not going to work for a rentable unit. It's going to be much too big. So the approach taken was they're going to be fairly narrow units. We're going to try and maximize the amount of light penetration and we're going to have some buried bedrooms. So these suites have living spaces up front, and they have buried bedrooms further back. On the other side, where there's not quite as much depth, there's a 14-meter depth. Decision was taken, well, let's make these units a little bit wider. You still get the proportions of that are going to allow for more frontage. So we have a 6-meter frontage, which allows for a bedroom and a living space up front. And then in some cases, we also have a buried bedroom further back, like you can see there. This is also on the typical floors. There's a corner unit. So different condition in the corners. Obviously, you can use the corner for bedrooms as well, because you have more surface area of glazing. Kind of use those inset corners to create a nice lounge space and a living area. And then we have the bedrooms off to the sides. And there's a smaller unit, there's a typical 1-bed unit on the other side of the page. Those also we've made fairly narrow so that we can get a buried bedroom into there. So then we'll look at some of those non-typical floors. As I was saying, with the ground floor, we're considering putting a mezzanine in. I'll just show you the section of that. So we're using that 6.1 floor to floor height to get an extra space in. So with these units, we're going to set back that mezzanine space about 7 meters from the exterior glazing. And then you're going to have a really nice, obviously double height space up against the facade. And that's going to be where the living space is. And then further back in the suite, we'll have bedroom at that upper mezzanine, and then bedroom and living at the main space at the ground floor. So we'll take a look at a unit layout for that. So that's one of those unit layouts from 2x4. See the living space up front, the staircase that leads up to that mezzanine space. And there's a bedroom obviously tucked underneath that mezzanine with a washroom and a den. And at that upper space, which should be really nice, bedroom space is a bedroom. It has its own living space. It has its own bathroom and walk-in closet and stuff. So good utilization of that kind of additional height. And likewise for that upper floor. So this is the level 14 that had that mechanical mezzanine space in. And so the decision for this space was, as we have like 6.7 meters, was to actually add a completely new floor. So that mechanical mezzanine that's there right now, which takes up about a third of that floor, we're going to take out all the mechanical from that space, and then we're going to expand that slab so it covers the entire floor. So we're using that kind of datum line to set the new floor slab. And unfortunately, you'll see from this section here, that lower slab is where that mezzanine floor slab is currently. However, that yellow box shows where the existing kind of perimeter beams are. So in that double height space, there's this perimeter beams kind of floating that go column to column in a ring around the perimeter. And unfortunately, they're higher than the mezzanine slab. The mezzanine slab kind of ties into the bottom of those existing beams rather than the top. So what we've had to do in order not to kill that space with this kind of odd projection into it is to kind of create a zigzag. So we need to extend the slab to the perimeter to pick up the window wall facade. But what that did, unfortunately, is it's quite a difficult dimension. The distance from the kind of inside edge of that beam to the outside glazing was too deep for it to be used for something such as like a seating area, like a banquette seating, or maybe just to put artwork or plants on. It was too deep and it killed too much of the unit to do that. So the decision was taken to, rather than minimize that, was to expand it. So what we're going to have is kind of split level units on that 15th floor. So the living space, and this is just a diagram, obviously it's going to go further back into the space than that. They're going to be full living spaces that are at these higher points. And the remainder of the space, like the bedrooms and the washrooms and stuff are going to be at that lower slab. So there's a slightly different approach to the ground floor in terms of how to use that additional volume. And now I'll just show you a quick alternate solution, and this is from another project. As I mentioned, Amex are working on a project at Central Park that's also an adaptive reuse from office to residential. So the solution for this one is a similar problem in the sense that the floor plates were pretty deep. But you can see on the rendering there that they have balconies and there's some structure out there. So we'll just look at the plan. You can see there that these have these kind of wraparound balconies at the perimeter, and you can see columns out there picking up the edge of those balconies. So that's all existing structure. So in this project, the decision was taken in order to avoid some of those extra deep units to actually pull in the facade. So the facade is actually set back about 1.7 meters from the slab edge and the existing columns. And then they've used that extra depth on the outside to create these balconies. There's obviously some benefits from a design perspective in doing this, but there's also some drawbacks in terms of sustainability, because obviously it's an existing slab that's extending out there that obviously doesn't have any breaks in it. There's no thermal breaks. So there's obviously some things to think about in terms of cold bridges and things like that. So it's a different approach, it's a different design solution, but both of them have their challenges, should I say. And so as I mentioned earlier, I remember I was showing you those iron triangle diagrams and how this project was going to be fairly flexible in terms of the schedule and the project management style. So just to show what's happening with that. So the top line there of that diagram is kind of the sort of linear timeline of the conversion of the office to residential in terms of approvals. And so obviously we've been going through the process of PAC meetings with the city, ZBA application. We're pretty close to having ZBA approved right now, hopefully. And the SBA should be fairly quick given the kind of the level of detail that we have in the project already. But those processes, they're not the quickest. And in this case, we have an existing building and we have a client who's fully committed to the project, obviously. And so we've been looking at what we can do from an office to office perspective within what's allowed, in terms of approvals, to start some of the work up front. So as the tenants have been moving out, we've been applying for interior alteration permits on the basis of it still being office space, so that we can clear out all of the interior partitions, take out the suspended ceilings, and return those spaces to a base building condition, which is basically going to speed up the construction process for the residential once that happens. So that's one solution to get things moving quicker. Another is recladding of the building itself. So there's obviously nothing to say that you can't reclad an office building. So we've actually applied for and received permit to reclad the building on the basis of it being the recladding of an office. And so what that's allowed us to do is get ahead mainly with the removal of the precast, the demolition of that facade. So now that we have that permit in place already, even though we're still at ZBA with the conversion, it's allowed us to start pulling off some of the precast and the ribbon windows and prep that building, prep the slab edge and stuff for the future installation of the window wall system. And we've actually already been working with Toro on that window wall. And they're planning on getting, starting the manufacture and delivery of those windows to site pretty soon. So we're hoping that once we get all of the approvals in place, SBA permit, we should already be underway with the actual installation of the window wall, and that's going to hugely increase the it's going to hugely speed up the construction timeline for this job. So this is just a before and after view of the facade itself. So we'll just move on to some of the sustainability items for this project. Some of the measures and the factors that we're introducing. So achieving sustainability goals. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have an HVRF system for this building. We're also going to be using some solar panels on the facade, and I'll just talk about some of that in the next slide. We're going to be improving the insulation and the seals. Obviously, the existing precast, pretty old, wasn't very well insulated, wasn't sealed great. Same for the roof. There's not a lot of insulation on the roof. We're going to redo all of that and make sure everything's tight and insulated properly. We're not going to put any new balconies or anything on this. We're not insetting. We're going to enclose it fully. And that's obviously a benefit from a energy efficiency standpoint. Same for the ratio of vision glass. Even though we're trying to maximize the light penetration, we're going full height glazing on those residential floors. We are actually still hitting a 60-40 split into 60 for solid, 40 for vision glass. The solid in this case being metal panel, spandrel panels, some of the existing precast, and these solar panels. So obviously that 60-40 ratio is kind of a benchmark that you want to hit. So we're still doing that by keeping the tall vision glass in the right areas and making as much of the solid in the areas where we don't need that vision glass. We have the minimized number of parking spaces that we talked about, and obviously the biggest factor here is probably the repurposing of the existing structure and the fact that this significantly reduces the carbon footprint of the project in general. So just moving on to the solar panels. So we've been working with a company called Metrex Solar, and this image on the right isn't actually a system specifically that we're using. That's one of their other products that's like a retrofit sort of recladding product. In our case, what we're actually going to do is, Metrex are going to provide these kind of spandrel assemblies. They're going to be given to the window wall supplier and inserted into their system. So what Metrex have told us is if you clad about 10% of the existing facades of the building with these panels, you should be getting around 15% energy cost reduction over the course of a year. And here's just an elevation that just shows the configuration of those panels within the window wall system. So we're reaching the end of the presentation. Thank you all for listening. So I had a few takeaways from this. So as I said, we're kind of, still fairly early on in the project. So I'm sure in a year or so we'll have a lot more takeaways from it also. But I guess whilst putting the slides themselves together, a few of the things that I thought about. So from a design perspective, obviously the difference in the floor plate sizes from a residential, the floor-to-floor heights, the differences from that are both a challenge and an opportunity. And I hope we've seen some, at least some workable solutions today, a couple of workable solutions. Another takeaway for me was the from a project management perspective. Obviously this kind of agile and adaptive approach to the project schedule, I think it can yield some good results in terms of, it being an existing building. I think those two things kind of fit together well. And also from a CMHC financing perspective, a commercial conversion to a rental, I think those things also kind of dovetail quite nicely together in terms of making good use of some of those not quite so premium floor spaces that you are going to end up with in an adaptive building, as opposed to if you were designing from scratch something that was obviously more efficient from a floor layout perspective. So those are my takeaways anyway. And thank you, Claire. I'll just
Yeah,
hand back to you.
thanks, Daniel. I know we've got a bunch of questions already, but I think we actually had some polls that Shalika can launch just to see where the audience is in terms of, yeah, so there's three questions. The first one, from your experience, how common are suitable candidates for adaptive reuse in Ontario? And you can choose one answer. And then the second question is, you could change one thing about zoning or policy to make office conversions easier, what would it be? And you just can answer one there, so the top one there. And then the third one is, do you believe adaptive reuse can become a mainstream housing strategy in Toronto or your city? So we'll give the audience a moment or two to answer. We're getting we have a great audience participation. So we'll just give everybody a minute to look at these three questions and throw down their answers. And then we've got a good amount of time left to get into like a bunch of questions. So maybe just 15 more seconds, everybody. So yeah, at 1:20, we'll stop the poll, Shalika. Great, we can share the results now. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if there are any surprises for this first question. So it looks like about 17% find it very common for them to be suitable candidates for adaptive reuse. And then it looks like most people are in the occasional category. Okay, so for these four answers, it looks like it's a pretty even split. All four of them, except for maybe the relaxing the municipal green standards, which is the least popular. I don't know if you had any key insights from this, Daniel.
Well, I think from the first question, I guess I would
Yeah,
agree occasionally.
yeah,
I wouldn't say it's very common. It depends where you are as well, I guess.
yeah,
Obviously more so in some cities than others, and more so in other parts of the world than others as well. I think kind of in places in Europe, where there's kind of more a lot more existing in buildings that are kind of suitable for adaptation and stuff like that in urban centres. In Toronto, obviously it's a big city, and there's plenty of building stock out there.
yeah,
I would say, but there is also in places like Toronto, a lot of opportunity for new build. And I think the point is I was trying to make with the European cities is that there's a lot more buildings that it's difficult to demolish.
yeah.
Whereas in Toronto and other Canadian cities, that's not necessarily the case. It's a slightly different process. So
Okay,
I would agree with occasionally on that one.
yeah.
If you could change one thing about the zoning or policy, more flexible use permissions. So it's a pretty even split on that. I suppose the point is all of them.
Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised there's an even split on that one.
Yeah,
Faster
yeah,
approval timelines is probably one thing
yeah.
that I would think. Um, I think we like I guess a couple of anecdotes from this project, and the city are obviously fully on board with
Mhm,
this. I hope we should have the rezoning soon. They think it's a great project also.
mhm.
Uh, but what I've noticed is that hasn't necessarily translated to things moving much quicker than say a new build a rezoning. Uh,
Right, okay.
One example being we were asked to do a block context study for the neighborhood, um, which I can understand because the neighborhood itself, there's our office building, there is the twin office building, and a lot of open space around it over
Mhm.
those sites, the parking lot in between. And so the city, they want to know, what's the vision for the future of that area. My concern is that maybe that could have been left till phase two. I feel like this building's not going anywhere, right? The 250 Farran building. Whether the city approves the rezoning, the ZBA for that building or not, there's still going to be a building there. So I don't really think the block context study at this point was necessary. And I think maybe that could have been left to a later phase that would have helped to speed things up. So
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and then the final poll question, it seems like most people, the vast majority of people think that it's either going to be absolutely or possibly part
mm,
of the mainstream housing strategy in Toronto. So that's encouraging to see.
I think a possibility. And obviously,
Yeah.
time as things, become
Mhm.
more dense, then that possibility will increase as well. So
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, let's get into the questions because we've got a whole bunch and I'm seeing more coming in. The first question, and this struck me too, there's not a lot of parking on this space. So, and as you pointed out, it's really close to public transit. But are there pathways? Like, and the other question I have in relation, like, is there street parking? Do you think that's going to be a barrier? Yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit more about this lack of parking as a, you
lack of
know,
parking. Yeah.
that seems
So
to be part of our culture in Toronto is to drive, right?
yeah, and so the city are kind of trying to, well, not trying to enforce a change on that, but I think they understand
Mm-hmm.
now that in certain areas that doesn't need to be the case, and that
Mm-hmm.
people should be encouraged to not drive when they live in like an MTSA, a multi-transit station area. So this project is in an MTSA, and we saw on that map that there's a lot of different options from a transportation perspective.
Yeah.
It's, I guess the point is it's socially responsible to not encourage people to drive so much. So
Yeah.
um, within those MTSAs, I know that on a lot of even new build projects now as well, even it's been the case that the number of parking spaces for residents themselves have been reducing. They're really low on a lot of current
Mm-hmm.
applications. Um, Developers are providing minimal parking for visitors, and then a small amount for tenants. And that's obviously based on market forces, what they think they need. And those numbers are definitely coming down. So in this case,
Mm-hmm.
with it being in an MTSA, it seems like a reasonable approach. And as I said, there is a little bit of flexibility on this project because there will be a phase two. And that phase two will have, or likely will have, the below grade parking. So, once this rental building is up and running, they can also assess those
Mm-hmm.
needs and
Mm-hmm.
possibly accommodate some additional parking for this building at that later stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just in terms of like pedestrian paths, is that something that you were part of the planning process of getting to and from the transit hubs?
Yes, I mean, as part of that block context study, actually, we were looking at mid-block connections and how that's all going to fit it between the phase one and the phase two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the city want to introduce an additional road through there as well, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's private or public, I'm not sure. Um, and there is already great connectivity. There's bike lanes along Ferran Drive itself that connect up to Eglinton that has the new LRT and bike lanes all the way along it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the infrastructure is actually already there, I would say. It's only really what's behind the site, the phase two areas and that central parking lot that's not owned by Amexon Development. It will need some kind of laying out and consideration, but for 250 Ferran Drive, for that building itself, the infrastructure is already there.
Okay, great. And there's a question about some long or maybe dead end corridors on the north side. That's one of our attendees noted. Are they grandfathered or were special
No,
agreements in place?
they're within the 6 meter
Okay.
distance. So they're like 5.99 or something right now. So that's
Yeah.
they're within the limits of a dead end corridor. And
Okay.
obviously in some cases you can circulate around, and because it's a scissor stair, obviously you have access from both sides of that. There's two exits in the center. So as long as those 6 meter, as long as you have less than the 6 meter dead end to those exit doors, then you're okay.
Mm,
That's how it
okay.
is right now.
Okay. Great. And then there's a question, one of the viewers noted some of the renderings showed hard surfaces below and above. Had there been thought into how acoustics would impact these units at all?
Um, I would say we're not really at that point yet, and looking specifically, there will
Mhm,
be there's going to be some ceilings within some units if they're above or below amenity spaces, for example. Obviously, below the roof, there's going to be acoustic treatment and things like that. Um, like I say, it's kind of it's funny with this project because of the scheduling and the fact that we're still kind of in the zoning phase, but we're fairly advanced in other parts. In terms of the suite arts and stuff like that, it's still ongoing, the design, and some of these things haven't really been tested yet, I would say.
okay. Uh, and there's a question, I don't know what this acronym stands for, so hopefully you do. It's how did you address the HCP suite requirements? Does that?
I saw that acronym stands for ESA. What's
I Googled
HTTP?
it and I just saw healthcare provider. So maybe if the attendee
What?
wants to clarify that acronym, because I know there's so many acronyms in our
I know
world.
I'm not
I
very good with
don't
acronyms.
I don't know that one either, and I couldn't find it. So maybe it was flipped or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, maybe that we
Maybe
can.
that's a CMHC requirement. But
Oh, yes,
it
yeah.
could it could be. I mean, it could be part of that, and it could be to do with the accessibility requirements. For
Hmm.
that, you need some bigger units. You need larger spaces, obviously for washrooms, space around all sides of the bed, things like that for wheelchair
Hmm.
users. Um, and as I mentioned, 2x4 are working on the interiors at the moment for that. And
Hmm.
we're still kind of at a stage where the client is looking at the different weighting of the point system for the CMHC financing.
Hmm.
And so that's another one that's kind of in play right now. It's up in the air. We're going to start looking soon at, which of these suites do we think are the most suitable for the accessibility, and which ones should we adapt to get that extra space. But it's something that we haven't fully defined yet. We're still
Hmm. So ongoing. Okay.
working.
And again, in the kind of climate action realms, there's a question about what consideration or was there consideration given for material reuse or circularity?
I mean, we're certainly trying to maintain as much as we can on the interiors, right? We're maintaining all of the existing structure of the building, all of the concrete. The only thing that's really coming out is going to be that precast, and there's reasons for that. Like we're we're going to make the facade more energy efficient anyway, and we are going to insulate better and things like that. So the only things that's coming off um, is stuff that we think we can't reuse. Everything else on the interior, the elevators and everything are staying as per the office. The stairs we're not changing. We just have to add some stairs to get an additional second exit to the roof, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
We're reusing as much of the electrical as we can. We're reusing the standpipe system and the fire hose cabinet locations, all of this stuff. So
Hmm. Great.
yeah,
That's,
we have tried to reuse as much as we can. There's not a
yeah,
lot that's actually been taken out and taken away.
right. Mhm. Um, were there any incentives beyond CMHC? I don't know if that's the
Yeah,
right
that's the right one.
CMHC.
Yeah.
Okay. ML1 Select program, or for example, were there any incentives from the city?
I'm not sure about that. We'd probably have to ask Amex on the developers to what they're applying for or not. I do know that
Like a,
I know
yeah.
about the CMHC because that we're having to look at those design standards and stuff and incorporate
Hmm.
those and the Toronto Green standards into into our design. But there probably
A
are
green,
some other
yeah.
incentives out there that they're
Well,
looking
we
at,
just
but
had a webinar on the green roof program for the city of Toronto, so maybe that's in the works too. I don't know if that's part of the development, but okay, so on the slide about breaking the different construction steps and doing interior alterations more piecemeal style,
yeah.
does this not eliminate some of the economies of scale with pricing sub trades?
Yeah, possibly. That's a good point. I suppose
Hmm.
it could do that. It depends who they're using. I know that
Hmm.
I think Amazon have like a team of their own. I think they have
Hmm.
construction team that are probably fully full-time employed. So I don't necessarily think it would make a difference if they get those guys in now to do some of that earlier work, the removal of the removal of those office partitions and stuff like that. I'm not sure it's going to affect much further on in terms of that. I understand what they're saying now.
Hmm. Yeah.
Also giving them the opportunity to get in, clear out those spaces, just to look at them, see what's there, and trying to figure out the next phases without having uh, without having tenants and without having partitions and stuff in the way.
Mhm.
So I think the main point is the 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 time, right? It's a great saver of time.
Okay, the next couple of questions are about the interior bedrooms, and I don't know if you can speak to this specifically. If there's a code requirement around needing a window, and was there
Yeah,
flexibility with that requirement with the city? How did that
yeah, there
play
are
out?
requirements, yeah, in the building code for light penetration, and there's certain ratios, I'm sure everyone's aware of,
Hmm.
um, that you have to meet with the light penetration. And so for that, I'm going to say they will be tested, and I hope they work out. But there may be some required revisions along the way just to meet those requirements. But like I
Mhm.
said, so these are the preliminary suite layouts
Got it.
at the moment. This is the design concept. Obviously, we're going to try and maximize the amount of light penetration that we can based on those extra tall floor to ceiling heights that we've got. And those the light penetration will be tested, and we'll keep our fingers crossed and move from there.
Great. And then a couple of questions around the costing. And
Yeah,
to the extent you're even able to answer this question, I know sometimes it's still in flux,
it
but
might be too early. Yeah, sure.
yeah, there was a question about the approximate cost per square foot for the conversion. And then also,
Yeah, I
in
can't
that
answer that.
vein,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe the first question is, have you had a cost consultant? And do you know specifically what the industry standard was used to define affordable housing? And I feel like that
Yeah.
could probably be another whole webinar just on
Yeah, I
that
know.
issue
Yeah,
alone,
I don't
right?
think I
It's
can answer either of those questions
yeah,
right now for this project.
yeah, yeah, that's fair. But it's something, yeah, I think cost and affordability of housing is something that is, I know we've had a lot of webinars on, so maybe we'll invite you back and just on that topic, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
affordability kind of ties in as well, obviously, to the TMHC financing. The affordability of units is
right,
one of those requirements, and
right,
you can weight that one as well. You can apply more weighting to the affordability versus
yeah,
the accessibility, for example, if you wanted. So uh,
right.
that as well is something that the developer is looking at. We would look at the building specifics, like is it suitable to get the additional spacing for accessibility and stuff like that, or if not,
Mhm.
then do we focus more on um, sustainability and the price of the unit, stuff like that. So
Affordability, yeah. Yeah. Are you working with a cost consultant at this time? Do you know?
no, we're not
No.
working
Okay.
with them directly
Okay.
right now.
Okay. Um, Okay, so no, sorry, back to the issue of the bedrooms. Were there sliding glass doors in the bedrooms that you used? Is that how you're getting the light penetration?
Yeah, probably glass. They might be a frosted glass or something like
Awesome.
that. But yeah, that again, it will kind of work with 2x4 on the design of those panels.
Right.
But they fully, you can open them fully, right? So they'll be slid open and then allows light penetration in.
Mhm. Um, okay, so in terms of those floors where there were mixed use, have there been any discussions yet around, so one attendee wants to know if there's going to be a business center or any specific thought to what the amenities are going to be at this point, or is that too early?
Yeah, no, there's been some thought. Yeah, so as part of the ZBA process, the city have asked for some commercial space to be maintained. And obviously we did plan on putting a little bit into the ground floor anyway. So there's gonna be two small suites on the ground floor and two commercial units. One is has like an associated outdoor space. So we kind of envision that as being a cafe or something with a nice terrace. And that's kind of on the street side. And then there's another commercial unit that's yet undefined. And then we have, so there's amenity that's going to be going into that lower concourse level. That's the kind of a big space down there, that's at the moment undefined. And then we have the rooftop. So we're going to put a lot of the amenity up onto the roof. So there's going to be a new structure built up there that's going to house some indoor amenity that's lounges and a gym, some other flexible spaces.
Mhm.
And then the outdoor space is going to have some kind of typical amenity stuff like the seating and barbecue stations, that type of stuff. But there's also going to be a lap pool. So we're going to be building a new slab, a new deck and stuff, and dropping a kind of fairly shallow pool into there. So just a narrow lap pool onto the roof. And the rooftop space, actually it has quite amazing views of the city. It's
Mm,
that location. It doesn't have a lot of other tall buildings around it, and you
yeah.
can actually see right down to the downtown core, the CN Tower and everything. You can also see the lake from there, and you can see in every direction.
Mm,
So the developers really been thinking, it's a great opportunity to put some stuff up there on the roof.
yeah. So
And because
that's great.
because we have some of that, because we're kind of trying to use some of that internal space, the not so premium internal floor space on some of the typical floors for the mechanical and stuff. That's kind of freeing up more space on the roof to allow us to do some of that stuff. So
Nice. Wow. Yeah, we can't put a price on that view of the skyline in Toronto. It's
yeah, it's gonna be
so
nice.
nice. Um, okay, another back to sort of like the climate action topic. One of our attendees really appreciates the energy savings mentioned in not carving balconies out of existing envelopes.
Yeah.
He's wondering, or she's wondering, how the operating side, where the Juliet doors are open, was there about that? Was there any modeling done to compare them, to compare with the thermal bridge savings?
Um, no, I don't think it's a direct comparison because those balcony with the thermal bridge would also have operables, I guess. So in that scenario, you're gonna have a slider that takes you onto the balcony plus the thermal bridge. Where in our case we don't have any thermal bridge, but there is an operable. So I don't think it's a direct comparison in that sense.
And I don't know to the extent to which you can share this information, but
Mm.
our attendees are really curious about the costs and specifically how much was covered by CMHC. I don't know if you're at liberty to disclose that
No,
or
I don't know. I'm not sure
you
that
can't.
the
Yeah,
developer knows yet either. It's kind of,
yeah,
as we go through the design process where, we'll be working on those, on that
right,
point system and
right, right.
weighting it and making sure that we comply. I, I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know how much there, will be covered.
Mhm.
I do know that the minimum you can apply for is $1 million. And I know that the minimum that you can design to is 5 units. So you have to have minimum 5 units, and you have to be applying for a $1 million at minimum loan. So it's more,
Okay.
you know, larger scale projects, right? The financing. So
Right. And it's a kind of a moving target
yeah.
or a process, the iterative process. Yeah, okay. So another attendee is really appreciating the presentation project. I can tell by all the questions, there's a lot of engagement in this topic, which is great to see. And he's wondering if you've used case studies. His or her examples were Two Fieldway, which was a Bell Canada building repurposed in 2008 in the Bloor Islington area. So
Mm.
I don't know if
Two
you
field
could,
way?
yeah, Two Fieldway
Okay.
at Islington and Bloor. So that's, I guess, a Tobico or right on
Yeah, I
a,
don't know that project, but I'll
yeah, 2008.
Okay.
So interesting time to
Yeah.
build
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I guess if it finished in 2008, that's okay. But yeah, I don't know. Were there any other case studies that you looked at for the audience who's interested in
I can't think of
not
any
on
off
the
the top of my
yeah.
head to answer that question,
But
but
thank you to the
I'm
attendee
going to
who
take a
shared
look at
the
that two
yeah,
field window
Two Fieldway,
so
yeah.
thanks for that.
Yeah. It's interesting to see these like well, I kind of consider them like newer office buildings because there was I feel like a trend in the late 90s of older like turn of the century factories like the
Yeah,
candy
exactly.
factory and the
Yeah,
button factory.
more
And so
industrial conversions and stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and now things are kind of going into the more I don't know what the original age of that building is, like you mentioned it, but yeah,
yeah, I think it's
80s or
like 60s, I think.
60s, yeah. Because John Mills was all built in the 60s, so that
Yeah.
makes sense. Just one clarifying question around the 60/40 vision glass. Was that 60% vision and 40% spandrel?
No, it's the opposite. So
Yeah.
it's 60% solid to
Mhm.
40% vision. So
Okay.
some of that, the solid is made up of all the pieces that are basically not clear glass. So some of it is glass, but it's spandrel where obviously it's insulated behind and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and some of it is metal panel, and some of the other solid is the existing precast. So we did keep those corners, the precast corners to the building. We sort
Mhm.
of picked a point where there was a joint basically in the precast panels.
Mhm.
So we're taking off those sections with the windows and we're leaving those kind of corner verticals in the job. So we've kind of maintained as much as we can and replaced kind of what we need to replace to, put the more residential style facade with the full height windows in.
Right.
Uh, but those, so the
Okay.
spandrels, as I mentioned, they are actually gonna be solar. So that the part of the solid facade, part of that 60% is gonna be energy generating for the building.
Nice. Okay. A couple questions about the pool. And I don't know if that was the lap pool that you were talking about or another
Yeah,
pool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is that going to require additional structural support? And there's a follow-up question about, do you know then, so that you know, is CMCH going to be funding any of that pool as well?
Right. I don't think that they are. But in terms of structure, it will require some additional. So we will obviously working with the structural engineer
Mhm.
to figure out what's required there, and the structure is all concrete, like the roof slab as well, the existing roof slab, and it's fairly substantial, so it wasn't the end of the world, and it's going to be a fairly shallow pool. It's a lap pool, so the water itself is only 3 or 4 foot deep. But yeah, there's going to be additional structure added either at the 15th floor ceiling
Mhm.
or possibly just upturned structure on the top of that slab. There's going to be slab thickening. Basically, there's probably going to be a slab poured underneath that pool. And we have to add some additional structure and stuff up there for the new indoor amenity space, for the new, there's a big air handling unit and stuff going up there. And just to create some of the other outdoor terrace spaces as well. So there's going to be a brand new varying floor build-ups for the roof in general. There's going to be a fitness area, obviously some paved terrace areas and pool deck and stuff. They'll all have different build-ups, but the existing roof slab is kind of uninsulated from what we can see. So everything's going to be stripped off, and we're going to be adding sort of new sloped insulation and stuff to kind of bring that up to code.
Okay, so question sort of in a different direction in terms of the people who are going to be the tenants of this building. Has there been kind of thought about who, I don't know if the right word is the target audience or the target
Like the
tenant?
demographic for
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I think in this case, because it's an existing building, and we're dealing with, you know, those deep floor plates and the existing size, the kind of the sweet mix that's come out of it, the type of units and stuff, has more been generated by the space that's available and the design. Again, in a typical downtown condo, you know, it will be looked at from a marketing point of view, and what's typically determined for those condo buildings is that you want a higher percentage of the smaller units, the one beds, the 1+10s obviously sell very well downtown and stuff, and you usually have a smaller percentage of the 2 beds and the 3 beds and stuff. For this building, it's the opposite. Like those 3 beds and 2 beds make up actually the majority in this case. It was a 60-40 split in the other way. I don't think that was necessarily a decision that the developer took because they're trying to hit that target audience. I think it was more a case of what worked best for the building. And then obviously it's not necessarily a bad thing in this neighborhood, with it not being right downtown. It's a little bit further out, and there are, you know, low-rise houses and apartment buildings. You know, it's a family-oriented neighborhood anyway. There's schools and stuff in the area, so those bigger units do kind of fall into that. But I wouldn't say that was a definite decision made early on to have the mix that way around.
Yeah. Yeah, you're more working, like you said, with the space that you had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this question about the waste management strategy and the plumbing and the sanitary. Was that a challenge in this project to consider with existing space?
A little bit. Yeah, it's always a challenge. In this case, there was an existing there's an existing loading dock at the back of the building, and there's an existing internal garbage room for obviously for the commercial building that's there now. So we're kind of keeping those things in the same location. Like we have garbage room and stuff on the ground floor for storage. The chute comes down to that location. And we're maintaining the kind of overhead door location. But on this building, there isn't enough space internally to accommodate a truck, like the City of Toronto standards for the loading bay. With this building, with it being commercial and with it being a bit older, the loading bay is outside. So the existing loading bay is outside the building. So our original application, we applied just to maintain the existing, and we kept that loading bay outside, which means garbage pickup and stuff. You know, the bins would have been taken out and picked up outside, taken from the inside to the outside, specifically at the pickup times and stuff. The City of Toronto hadn't accepted that. So we can keep it in the same location. So the loading bay is still going to be the loading bay. It's just that they've asked for us to enclose it. So we're now going to have an additional kind of 1-story, you know, like 6 point something meter high volume that encloses that where the existing loading bay is now. So
Okay. Great. And then more in terms of the details, getting into the weeds, I think you mentioned that you're keeping the existing elevators. Were there considerations to be made in terms of how to service them or at least?
Well, we've had one or two challenges in terms of the vertical circulation. Yeah, so we have four. There's four existing elevators, and that's enough for this number of units.
Mhm.
So when they're in good condition, so they're being maintained. But what we obviously we've added floors, so we have an additional floor at level 15. And so we also want the elevator right now doesn't go all the way to the roof. So we've had to add an additional elevator, which is going to take people from the existing level 14 slab to the level 15 and then to the rooftop amenity space. And it's not so challenging, I suppose. But that's the solution to do that. We had to add one extra elevator. But one of the challenges from our perspective in vertically was the fact that two exit stairs don't go to the roof. For the existing commercial building, there's only one stair that goes up there because the roof is just a service space. There's just rooftop units and stuff up there, and the elevator equipment room. But in our case, because we're going to have occupancy up there, we have to get an additional stair to go up. So we've had to look at how we cut into the existing slabs to bring. So I suppose I should describe. So there's a scissor stair that goes up the center of the building. So it's basically two exit stairs, and one of those exit stairs stops at the level 14, and the second half of it goes up to the roof. So we're looking at how we need to add that second half so that we have two exits at the roof. So that was a bit of a challenge, kind of avoiding existing structure and things like that, trying to get the dimensions to work with the existing stair risers. The fact that the existing stair risers aren't per the current OBC standards, it's an older building, so the tread and the vertical rise and stuff are different from from what the current OBC requires. So tying those things together is a code challenge. And it's a case of, I guess, grandfathering in some of those existing dimensions from the existing stairs and working on the basis that it's safer for someone to continue with the non-code compliant stair than it would be to transition from a compliant to a non-compliant stair in terms of falling. We don't want someone to fall to get to that point and change the rhythm of the step and then fall down the rest of the stairs. So
Okay, so I'm looking at the time. There's a lot of questions, some of which are kind of repeats of the same question.
okay.
So I'm going to ask maybe one more question and just note, I think there would definitely be another webinar. The session does end at 12:30. I think someone thought it goes till 1, but it starts at 11. Yeah, so it goes to 12:30. But yeah, I think a lot of people were wanting to know. Oh, I will make one note. The Bell building that was referred to earlier was built in 1971. So that's interesting.
Okay.
The conversion was 2008. Anybody wants to look at that.
Yeah.
So yeah, about the interest, have you noticed like the interest in the city for like student residence conversions? I'm thinking like maybe some of these buildings, maybe the viewers, some of these buildings would be suitable for student residents, or any other different kinds of uses that you've seen that you can share.
I mean, I think for this building that's kind of undefined as well right now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they're marketing specifically towards students though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suppose it all depends on what area it's in terms of
Yeah.
student accommodation. There's probably some great opportunities for these types of conversions that are close to the universities themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In this case, maybe it's probably not ideal, I would say.
Yeah, this is more residential, and although I
Yeah,
mean the facts, well, hopefully when the Eglinton line is
yeah. And then the transit means that it's very certainly flexible in terms of
yeah, Yeah, and it's quieter for people who want to be away from the downtown core too. Yeah, so I'm definitely thinking that there's going to be at least one or two other topics, a lot of questions on the accessibility, a lot of questions on the light penetration. So maybe we can invite you back and or your colleagues to come back and share information about those studies
Yeah.
and how that went. I think everyone's really curious about that, all the different amenities, how that's working, how the parking's working. So I'm gonna, yeah, just a couple of quick announcements, but remind everybody that we do hand out a survey. So if people have other suggestions for areas that you'd like to hear more about and go into in more detail, we definitely appreciate that. Yeah, so thank you so much, Daniel, and for stepping in on such short notice. We really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Yeah, it was great. So the next 3 weeks, we actually have 3 sessions that are all climate action. Next Tuesday, we have one with Toronto Community Housing 50 Tor Bolton Passive House retrofit project. So that should be really interesting. And then on the Thursday, November 20th, we have regenerative design framework. And there's also a new webinar that we've just added. So please have a look. It's AI and Architecture, Shadow and Light. So it's a really interesting and broad perspective on how AI affects the architecture world. And also, as everybody knows, we're coming up to an end of cycle year. So it's a good idea to give yourself that holiday gift by having all your hours done. Have a look at the offerings for this year. And I encourage you to sign up for any of those webinars that are of interest to you. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we will be updating your transcript for those of you who attended the 80% of the webinar. And just give us a week or so to process those hours. And as I also mentioned, we'll be sending you the survey, but also a link to the slides today, so you can have a closer look at this very interesting project. And having said that, I will wish everyone a wonderful remainder of their day. And thanks again, Daniel, so much.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye, everybody.